We are live.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This afternoon, we're going to continue testimony on H230 and hear from Jim Andrews, coordinator with Vermont Reptile Amphibian Atlas. Welcome.
Hey, thanks. Should I jump right into it?
Yes, please.
Sure. Although I'm speaking for the Atlas here, I'm informed by actions taken by the Reptile Amphibian Scientific Advisory Group to the Endangered Species Committee. And back in 2022, that scientific advisory group made a couple recommendations to the Endangered Species Committee, and then that was passed along to the secretary and then to Fish and Wildlife. And as a result, those recommendations ended up in this bill, along with a variety of other topics that have nothing to do with reptiles and amphibians. But I will speak to the reptile amphibian part. And the first part of it was a result of our concerns about the number of pond sliders that had been released in Vermont. This is a species native to Southern Virginia, and it's been introduced in all 48 states and in many countries around the world. And according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, it is listed among the 100 of the world's worst invasive alien species. And so we had concerns that this popular pet turtle was still legal to import into Vermont. And we wanted to see if it could be controlled before it really starts breeding here. It has become, around the world, the world's most widespread freshwater turtle. And as a result of it coming through the pet trade, it has introduced diseases to local populations, and it has been able to outcompete local populations of turtles. I don't know, some of you may be old enough, like I am, to remember that back in the day, you could buy a little turtle at the Ben Franklin store, and it came with a little plastic pond and a little plastic palm tree, and you could raise these little turtles. Most of these little turtles died pretty quickly, but if they didn't, then they could live 30 years or more, and little Johnny or little Susie would have been off to college, and the parents would still have had the turtle, and then they often got released into the wild in places where they shouldn't have been released. And so we now have a number of individuals that have shown up around the state. And see if I can show that to you. Can you see my map?
You can.
So these are the different places where we've had reports of these pond sliders. Now, what we hope is that we're too far north for them to be breeding successfully at this point, and that these are old adults. Some of them could live, well, at least one has lived as long as 48 years. But we're thinking that they're still limited in that they can't successfully breed here, but we're concerned that they could. They have been outlawed in our surrounding states, Massachusetts, Maine. European Union no longer allows them to be imported and sold. They compete with native turtles for food and nesting and basking and cover habitat. There is one particular shell disease that they have been known to introduce. So we're kind of behind our surrounding states. Breeding populations have established themselves in Massachusetts. Most introduced non-native species, reptiles and amphibians, can't survive our winters. So they don't even make it through the winter. But this one can. And our concern is that it will eventually start breeding here as well as our climate continues to warm. So some of the language that you see in H230 is trying to set up the state so that they have control over the import of this species. The ideal situation would be to not allow it to be imported and sold anymore, to grandfather in those people who already have them as pets, encouraging them to keep them inside as pets. And that's really the first part of what we were suggesting to include for reptile amphibian conservation. Are there any questions on that part, on the pond slider portion and what we're trying to accomplish with some language in this bill?
I just have a quick question. Looks like they're native to North America.
Virginia, Southern Virginia, and then from Southern Virginia across to the Mississippi drainage.
So wouldn't we expect a species native to Southern Virginia to make its way up here naturally?
Well, not for a few hundred years, I would hope yet, Amy. Just at the rate at which well, maybe 100 years.
Or less.
Depending on the rate at which we warm.
Yeah. I mean, but they would. Yeah.
But eventually they may. But at the same time, I mean, if we want to go with that argument, we could start importing alligators as well and see what happens.
I'm actually not shooting for an argument. I'm just asking. It's native to North America. We don't normally think of species that are, to me, in my mind, native to North America as being a huge invasive threat.
Oh, I see.
To ecosystems in North America.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, you might want to change that outlook because, I mean, some of our native species, like bullfrog, are invasive in the rest of the world or in the Western U.S.
In the U.S., though, I'm talking about on the continent.
And snapping turtles are now considered invasive in the Western U.S. They were introduced. So things are getting moved around within the boundaries of the U.S. and ending up causing problems to native species as they currently are.
Anyway, that's fine. I get it. We're all in on that part of the language. We've reviewed it with Ledge Council and with the Fish and Wildlife. So, but go ahead with your testimony.
Okay. The second part has to do with protection of non-listed reptiles, amphibians in general. As it stands, if you have a hunting license, you can shoot as many turtles or ribbon snakes or frogs if you want, as long as you have a hunting license. There's no season, there's no bag limit. One of our concerns is that if we're successful, say, with listing and recovery of something like, say, the rat snake, and it was not listed, then it would be huntable and takeable with no limits. Unlike birds, which have the migratory bird treaty to protect them, so you can't go out and shoot scarlet tanagers. You can any reptile or amphibian, and we would like that unless there is an open season that is created for one of our more common species, unless that were to happen, and that would be with a season and with bag limits, the other species are protected from take. We are trying to keep common species common and keep species from needing to become listed in the future. And I think this would be a step in that direction. As you probably know, many of our species are particularly long-lived. The reason that, they don't reproduce until maybe they're like a wood turtle until it's 14 years old. And then over the course of its life, it may managed to reproduce and replace itself and 3 or 4 others, as opposed to something like a deer that over the course of its lifetime might be able to produce 500 to 600 offspring and offspring of offspring and grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. So their whole reproductive process limits the amount that they could withstand hunting. And right now, say the wood turtle has been recommended for federal listing, but in Vermont, you could shoot as many as you want. And some of the show and tell wood turtle and other shells I have here have bullet holes in them, and that's how I happened to get those shells, as they were shot, I would assume, as just shooting practice. The other part of that is some people's fear of snakes. Something like the rat snake, currently listed and protected, but some people's first reaction is to whack it, drive over it, kill it. So we would really love to see and to allow Fish and Wildlife to protect these species unless they decide to create a season and a bag limit. Now, we did not recommend that there needed to be a season and bag limit on any particular reptile amphibian. Fish and Wildlife suggested that because they felt there might be some pushback as a result of current take to eat snapping turtles and to eat frogs' legs. And so that they might want to be able to create a limited season. That was not a recommendation of us. That was just something they felt might help it be politically viable. Personally, it's not recommended that you eat snapping turtles because they concentrate heavy metals and PCBs. And bullfrogs have disappeared from much of their former range. So I think it would be really unwise to have a season on bullfrogs. But even if it allowed Fish and Wildlife to establish seasons, they could establish a very limited season or very limited take, which would not or should not threaten them. But personally, I would rather see no take and no season. And so the language that's included there that regards reptiles, amphibians, among the many other things in this bill, those of us who are working for conservation of non-game species think that's good language and support it. Any questions on that part?
Do you support the language that's already there? Is that what you're saying?
The language that is recommended in H230, though I think there's some typos, and I would rather not see seasons, but let's see, where is that?
So are you looking at the most recent version of H230?
Bill as introduced, probably not.
Yeah, probably not, but I'm not sure if we've changed that language, so.
Well, one of the, like line 17, I think there's just a typo that makes it dangerous. The bill would clarify that a person could not take, collect, or possess a wild bird, wild animal, reptile, or amphibian with a permit. I think they meant to say without a permit.
Sorry, what page are you on?
That's page 1, number line 17 in the version I'm looking at.
Oh, that's it. Oh, yeah, that's description of what the bill does. Yeah.
So I guess that's not particularly critical that it's just in the description, but I did happen to notice that. So anyhow, yes, I do support the language with the added concern that I don't think we need seasons and bag limits to manage any herp species.
So you're on page 7 now, line 13.
Let me go. Let's see. I don't have 7 pages, so you're looking at a different version than I am. Where are you?
You don't have, we have 16 pages in our bill, and
Okay.
H230 as introduced is what I'm looking at. And that's, it's
Oh, Well, what is it? 4085?
Yep.
Okay, and then
Line 13 says establish open seasons for common species.
yeah, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, personally, I'm not in favor of that. I think it probably could happen if we felt there would be enough pushback from the public, but I don't think it's necessary. And for many species, I think for most species, it's unwise.
And the next one, I'll have to talk to Michael about how the 4 and 5 relate on that, lines 13 and 14. But
Oh, I see exactly where you are now. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be 4, 5, and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Four, 5, 6, 7, and 8, none of which I think are necessary, and I would actually prefer not to see.
Okay.
Any other questions, Amy, from you or?
Members have questions. We have Representative Bartholomew has a question.
Just wondering, you said that there's a possibility that the pond sliders are not reproducing. But if they're out there in enough numbers that you're finding them, it seems like if I just went out and released 2 of them, the chances of you actually finding them are pretty small. So does that mean that a lot of people are releasing them, or that you are able to find just a couple of individuals, or that they're breeding?
We certainly can find the individuals, but we have never found a youngster or seen young turtles hatching or emerging from a nest. I'm hoping that the heat and length of our summer limits their ability to fully mature over the length of a summer. The other thing that could potentially happen is that they could freeze within a nest if they didn't develop over the length of a summer. They could freeze and die over the winter because they're not particularly freeze tolerant. And our painted turtles can actually freeze and thaw and hatch out the next summer. So I'm hoping that they are not currently breeding at any of these sites. We haven't seen any young, we haven't seen any emergence. But that may change over time, and that's my fear.
Representative Austin.
Yep, I have 2 questions. One is, do you know if, like the frogs or turtle are any kind of, food for indigenous, Vermonters in Vermont? I mean, are they, is it in their ceremonies or anything like that, or in their menus or anything that they have, that they eat?
It's a good question, and I'm unaware of whether or not they regularly harvest any of our native turtles. I do know that some people have traditionally, and I've talked to these people, particularly people of Asian descent, have a tradition of eating turtles, not unlike we eat chicken. But because they bioaccumulate toxins, and particularly snapping turtles are particularly resistant to toxins, it's hard to kill them. So they could live in some nasty habitat and accumulate toxins. I think it's unwise to eat very many, but I don't know. I'm not familiar with Native American traditions. And the only turtle I've heard of in Native American traditions is the box turtle. But we don't consider that a native species at present.
Can I just clarify just the shooting of like frogs and turtles and snakes? Is that just for target practice? Is that, I mean, they don't shoot them in for food, right?
No, I don't believe so. I think those people that, those few people that actually eat them, capture them alive or trap them. Yeah. The shooting, I think, is the shooting that I'm aware of is turtles. And I think it's either target practice or maybe a mistake during, say, pickerel season where you can shoot fish. You know, it's
Mhm.
possible that they could mistakenly, they could see a ripple, think it's a fish, and shoot a turtle instead.
Okay. That's different than target practice for me.
Okay.
And then frogs legs, I don't know about some, but frog legs, if we, do people, catch frogs and use it, eat them for their legs? And would you recommend that we stop that practice?
You already
Um,
did recommend that.
I know some people do,
Okay, yeah,
or some people traditionally have at least, cod frogs and bullfrogs, because they're really the only one big enough to bother with in terms of size of the legs to eat them. I know some people have done that in the past. I don't know how many people do that currently. I would prefer to see that not happen. But if it were to happen, then the regulatory language around seasons and limits, I think, would be advisable. And I say I prefer to see that not happen because in some areas that species has disappeared. Um, in the heavily developed lakes, for instance, Dunmore, lakes like that are really popular camp lakes, species has pretty much disappeared.
Jim, is there a definition of common species?
Well, I suppose the easiest way to get at that would be the heritage ranks, and an S5 is, heritage ranks range from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most unusual species and 5 being the most abundant. And so I suppose if the easiest way to come up with a definition would be say S5 species.
So interesting with everything we know about the decline of abundance, how we determine what abundant is today.
Yeah.
What
Well,
does that even mean?
you have species like wood turtles that show up in a lot of places, but we don't know if those are old adults that are not reproducing anymore or whether they are still generating young and maintaining the populations. That's kind of a trick with some of these species. It may take another 10 or 15 years before we actually see declines that could be starting now.
Great. Thanks for your testimony.
You're welcome.
All right. We are going to continue talking about S230 with our legislative counsel, Michael O'Grady. Jim,
May
you're
I
welcome to,
listen in?
you may sit in. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, that would be
I can
great.
mute.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, this is Michael Grady. How would you like me to proceed?
I think we should. Our committee has walked through all the final version of the enforcement language in this bill, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So the only change in our latest version is that I asked Michael to attach. I think he started with Representative Austin's bill on the feasibility study for the Catamount, but then expanded it by looking at other states' statutes that had feasibility studies in them. So maybe we can just walk through that language.
Sure. So on page 15 of draft number 1, with an April 10th date with 308 timestamp, you will see section 12 on line 10.
We don't have that up. Hold on a second. Oh, yeah, this, sorry.
That
Line 10, got it. I'm getting there.
So as the chair referenced, I drafted a short form bill for Representative Austin. And then when I was fleshing out the language of that, I went to Colorado. Colorado has a statute on how they do reintroduction once an animal has been approved for reintroduction by the legislature. And then Oregon has plans that they issue when they do introduction. Colorado just approved the wolverine for reintroduction last year, and the fisher was had a plan for reintroduction in Oregon. And I used language from both of those sources in drafting section 12. So it's entitled Feasibility Study of the Reintroduction of the Catamount to Vermont and in Special Fund. On or before January 1, 2027, the Department of Fish and Wildlife completes a feasibility study on the reintroduction of the catamount. The scientific name is the Puma concolor to the state of Vermont. The study shall address ecological impact of reintroduction, including potential impact of reintroduction on other species, whether there's adequate amount of suitable habitat that exists in the state to support a population, whether adequate prey populations exist in the state to support a catamount population, whether there is a genetically suitable source population of catamount for reintroduction, the probable survival rates of the introduced animals, and any legal requirements under federal law for reintroduction of the catamount. For example, if they're listed as threatened or endangered, there might be limits on how they may be transferred interstate. On page 16, line 7, you will see that on or before January 15, 2027, the Commissioner, Fish and Wildlife submits to the General Assembly the results of the study and a report on whether the state should proceed with reintroduction. The report includes a summary of the steps or elements required for reintroduction, including how and by what entity reintroduction will be supervised, the schedule for reintroduction, the cost for reintroduction, summary of the potential impacts, including on the use of private property, a recommendation on whether the state should implement a program for the reintroduction, including the scientific rationale for any recommendation for or against reintroduction. Then the department is authorized to contract with a qualified consultant, university, institution, etc., for the completion of the feasibility study and the preparation of the report. Now, there was concern that this would be costly and that it would be outside the department's budget. So page 17, line 8, sub D creates a special fund to be administered by the commissioner to pay for the cost of completing the feasibility study and preparation of the report. The fund consists of private gifts, donations, etc., from any public or private source for the purposes for which the fund was established, and then any sums appropriated to the fund by the General Assembly. If monies in the fund exceed the costs or liabilities of completion of the feasibility study and report, the unexpended monies received from public or private shall be appropriated by the General Assembly for the support of wildlife conservation and preservation. Any unexpended state monies go back to the general fund. Generally, special funds all have that, or most of them have that authority to accept funds from private or public sources, because why not? There have been instances in the past where special funds were used for particular purposes or to address lack of funding for the intended purpose. And the bill or the act that I worked on that did that was the GMO litigation fund. There was concern that the AG didn't have enough budget of its own, so a special fund was set up to accept private donations for the purposes of defending the state GMO labeling law. And it worked. It does have a little bit of of a additional requirement, administrative requirement. When you are out of session, gifts to the state have to be approved by the Joint Fiscal Committee. It's to ensure that who is giving money to the state is someone you want to give money to the state. And it's not a terrorist organization or some other unwanted group or person. And generally what happens is the department or the Department of Finance administration goes in front of Joint Fiscal and provides all the information they know about the donor and the use of the money. And Joint Fiscal, I think I've only seen them disapprove one grant or one donation.
What happens when we're in session?
Pardon?
What happens when we're in session?
When in session, you're supposed to be able to handle that through the Appropriations Committee. Although Joint Fiscal does, the committee does
Me.
at times meet and review donations of this kind.
Members have questions on this? Representative Austin.
Could someone own a Catamount? I mean, if I just wanted to set up a big wildlife area in my home, I import a Catamount.
No. So the section after the section that Jim was talking about.
Page 7 was that section.
So page 7, a person should not bring into transport within transport through or possess in the state any live, wild bird or animal of any kind.
I don't get any ideas, Representative Austin. Representative Chapin.
The folks from out of state who introduced this, who do this kind of work with large cats around the world, the woman who, and I'm forgetting her name.
Emily.
When Emily testified, she went through what would be included in a feasibility report. Did you look at her testimony?
I did not.
Representative Murray.
It would be my preference to see item B on line 17, of page 17.
B.
Special fund?
Just sub B, yeah.
Oh, the general.
Oh, no,
General fund.
no appropriation from the general fund.
Because I know there are people in the state who definitely would not want this, and they would not want their tax dollars going to the fund.
Representative Pritchard.
Are we gonna have Fish and Wildlife testify about this?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
All right. No further questions. Next up, we're shifting gears to H86 with Michael O'Grady. And I'll do my best at summarizing where we are, and then Michael, you help fill in where I miss. But members may remember that the Judiciary Committee took a look at this, and they had some concerns with the timing of the BMPs and the liability protections that they would include for people who were certified and trained under them. And we worked with the chair of that committee, Martin Lalonde, and also our council and A&R on this idea that we'll walk through right now with Michael. That changes it makes the BMPs, it requires them to be rules, done through rule, I should say, and also changes the timing of when the liability opportunity goes into effect, such that the legislature might have time to respond if they had concerns with either the BMPs or the actual liability after that. Do I have that right, Michael?
Yeah, and I'll elaborate a little bit as well. So this is Mike O'Grady again. You should have draft number 4.2 of H86 committee amendment with a 4/15 date and a 10/44 timestamp. The the Judiciary Committee was concerned about timing because they didn't think there was opportunity for involvement of stakeholders, interested parties in the development of the BMPs, even though you had directed ANR to do that, and that they didn't think there was transparency in the process. I remember you had authorized the secretary to adopt the BMPs by procedure or by rule. Procedure's faster, it does involve less stakeholder involvement, but it's less expensive. Whereas rulemaking takes longer, is more expensive, but it does have a vigorous stakeholder participation process, public comment, need for the department agency to respond, submission to you of all public comment, and LCAR review. So it is a much more open and transparent process. So in speaking with the Judiciary Committee, they wanted to move to rulemaking for that ability of the stakeholders to participate and for it to be more open. And they wanted those standards to be issued before the liability protection went into place so that there was opportunity for the legislature to respond. So that's the impetus behind the changes. I also restructured the language so that it just needed, after all the motions and movements from the different changes, it needed to be restructured for clarity. And so I did that. So page 1, line 7, you still have the addition of a new subchapter to the water resources chapter in Title 10. It's named the same thing, the Chloride Contamination Reduction Program. It starts with the definitions. All of the definitions are the same as what you have seen previously. Apply salt, commercial salt applicator, master commercial salt applicator, salt alternative, transportation infrastructure, construction project. None of those have changed. And then you get to page 2, line 11. So this is where the creation of the program at the agency is called out in a clearer way. And it directs the secretary, after consultation with the Secretary of Transportation and other states, to establish the program for the voluntary education, training, and certification of salt applicators regarding effective and efficient application of salt and salt alternatives to provide safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles on traveled surfaces, but also reducing the impacts of salt and salt alternatives on the quality of the. It's basically established the program for this particular purpose. And it clearly says it's for the voluntary training. And there are other aspects of the language that reflect that is voluntary, where it's up to the applicator to apply. So then on page 2, line 20, is part of the program, ANR on or before July 1, 2026. So they get a year to adopt by rule best management practices for application of salt or salt alternatives by commercial salt applicators. And they may be based on the AOT practices. The BMPs that are listed are the BMPs that you have seen in previous versions. There will be measures to increase efficiency, so that the least amount of salt or salt alternatives are used while maintaining safe conditions. Establish standards for when and how salt and salt alternatives are applied to prevent them from entering waters of the state, including those salt alternatives that are cost effective and less harmful, whether and how to implement equipment to calibrate, monitor, or meter application when sand is appropriate as an alternative. Then establish record keeping requirements for commercial salt applicators. Create a model form for record keeping, establish requirements for certification, establish a testing requirement, establish other requirements deemed necessary by the secretary to achieve the purposes of the program. Again, they are not changed. Those are the BMPs that you have seen in previous versions. But then on page 4, the program shall offer training. Offer training. It's not require training. They offer training for commercial applicators and the implementation of the BMPs. Upon completion of training, The commercial salt applicator shall be designated a certified commercial salt applicator, and that will have a term of 2 years from the date of issuance of certification. So again, it's an offer program. It's voluntary for the applicator to complete the training. Then you have that language about the master. If there's going to be someone supervising multiple employees that are going to be engaged in commercial salt application, there can be a master commercial salt applicator that trains the others. That has not changed. It's just a little restructured. Then page 5, certified commercial salt applicator submits an annual summary of total winter salt usage to the secretary, and then the secretary shall establish methods to estimate and track the amount of salt applied by certified commercial salt applicator. So there's still data collection on salt usage, but it's not at the very detailed kind of step-by-step that was originally in the bill. Secretary may revoke a certification for a violation of the subchapter, the rules of the subchapter, or the provisions of the certification. And then you get some of the like cleanup provisions that were in the previous bill. The program shall include requirements for certification of a master commercial salt applicator. The program shall specifically exclude salt applications related to transportation infrastructure construction project. And then the secretary may elect to implement the program with state agency or through a third-party vendor or some combination. So there's the program. BMPs are required. Commercial salt application is voluntary. Completion of the course certifies the commercial salt applicator. And then page 6, beginning January 1, 2027, an A&R certified commercial salt applicator or an owner, occupant, or lessee of real property maintained by a certified commercial salt applicator shall not be liable for damages arising from hazards on real property owned, occupied, maintained, or operated by that person when the hazards are caused solely by snow or ice, and any failure or delay in removing or mitigating the hazards as a result of the certified commercial salt applicator's implementation of the BMPs. Again, the protection from liability does not apply when the damages are due to gross negligence or reckless disregard of the hazard. All certified commercial applicators shall be presumed to be acting pursuant to the BMPs in the absence of proof to the contrary. All of them get that rebuttable presumption that they are not discharging to waters or causing a stormwater runoff, provided that the presumption does not apply to requirements of a TMDL or an MS4 permit. And then in order to maintain the liability protection, the commercial salt applicator or the owner, occupant, or lessee of the land shall keep a record describing the winter road, parking lot, and property maintenance practices consistent with requirements of the secretary. And then on page 7, line 15, you get the education and outreach. It's kind of separated out on its own now. A&R through this.
Representative, sorry,
That's okay.
Logan. It was like deep into the bill.
Yeah.
Looks like I was at the movies here and then.
When should we ask questions about this draft
You have a question on a section we just finished?
or a comment?
Go ahead.
Okay. Will we have the opportunity to discuss, or is this more of a judiciary committee thing, whether or not we're going to apply a gross negligence or a negligence standard for the liability?
I think you have that opportunity. I think if you go to a negligence standard, you basically will not have any incentive for people to participate because negligence is effectively the standard right now. So why would someone go through the process if they don't receive any different standard of treatment than they receive right now?
You have a concern?
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like we're saying that as long as somebody's using the best management practices, they're not being negligent.
Yeah.
So it seems either redundant or maybe giving too much leeway for the applicators to have to, for somebody who's been harmed by ice, snow or ice, to have to prove a gross negligence. So that's recklessness.
Yeah. But they have to follow the BMP's document, they followed them.
Right,
And the
but
BMPs are designed to address snow and ice risk.
right, and as long as they're using the BMPs, basically that means that they're not negligent. But so if you were just to use a negligence standard, then something else would count as negligence. So if they're like using the BMPs, then there would have to be something else that,
So negligence is failure to follow a standard of care when you have the duty to do so, and that failure to follow that standard causes harm or damages. So by adopting these BMPs, they effectively become the standard of care that a certified commercial applicator needs to use. And failure to do that, any failure to do that follow that duty, that would be negligence. But gross negligence is negligence, but it's the failure to exercise even a slight degree of care. So the whole grant of liability protection is to protect the commercial applicator from that first phase of negligence. And to only apply liability when there's even the failure to apply even the slightest standard of care.
and for some reason, there seems to be like a middle category for me between gross negligence and following the BMPs. And also the, I guess it depends on how the BMPs are defined.
Representative Pritchard.
Well, I think a part of what your concern is it's been eliminated because part of the way it was written before is there was steps and there was things and in this onerous paperwork that was involved that now seems to be gone. So there's no, how do you check it? You don't, because there's no standard for it other than this 160-page thing from New Hampshire.
There's still record keeping.
For keeping requirement.
You just haven't gotten it.
The way I read it, it's just the amount of salt you buy.
No, it's on page 7. In order to maintain the liability protection, they have to keep a record describing its winter road parking lot and property maintenance, which includes the type and rate, dates of treatment, weather conditions for each event.
Okay, so the onerous is still there. So I would think you would be covered. Your concern would be covered by that.
I think the tension here is that the BMPs are oriented towards environmental goals.
No, they're not. They're actually balanced.
Right, okay.
That's the very beginning. That's what Michael went over.
Yeah, no, I know it just seems like they're balanced more towards the environmental goals. Or maybe it's in rulemaking that we would see more specific standards that would make me feel less
I mean, yes,
uncomfortable.
I think that's part of why we went to rulemaking.
Right,
So that it's a public engagement process, but it does, the first thing says effective, efficient application of salt and salt alternatives to provide safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles on traveled surfaces while also reducing
well, also,
impacts of salt.
yeah, I think it is just not having the specifics.
Representative Pritchard.
What was the reason for moving the date forward a year?
Well, you need to do rulemaking, and rulemaking generally takes 8 months. And the agency they actually said, well, would you give us a year?
Representative Logan.
So what would be an example of gross negligence?
In this instance,
Hmm.
you are basically going out and you are not, you're not assessing the conditions, you are not monitoring how your equipment is being used, you're not monitoring what you're applying or how you are applying, you're not managing where you are applying. And if that could all be proved, demonstrated, that would be gross negligence. Because you wouldn't be exercising any standard of care. And I wanna step back and say that yes, this provides liability protection for those that are implementing the BMPs to give them an incentive, but it doesn't take away an opportunity for someone that's harmed to seek redress. Remember, the liability protection is solely, it only applies when the harm is solely from a hazard of snow or ice, and any delay is caused by following the BMPs. And then there's the gross negligent and reckless disregard. I would think in many instances, an attorney for a harmed individual is going to be able to find a way to bring suit, saying the harm wasn't solely from ice or snow, that they weren't following the BMPs, that they were reckless, or it was gross. I think what it will do is it'll pause an attorney to look at the facts to see if they can show something that would pierce that liability protection. I don't think it totally removes an opportunity for litigation.
Representative Tagliavini.
This whole program is designed, I think, if I'm following everything, to prevent the need for a TMDL. Is that correct?
Prevent the need for yes, or to another way to address the chloride contamination issues that are likely to present themselves in more places in the state.
Fast forward a year or two, or when this is implemented, what will happen when, actually, there's going to be two questions. How much testing is going to be involved to show that, number one, this program, once it's implemented, is working or not? And what steps go into place when we find that all that we've done for best management practices to try to reduce the salt, it didn't work, and we're this close to a TMDL, then what?
Well, on the testing question, the state is required to assess its waters every 3 years, and they do testing of waters in those time periods. So at the very least every 3 years, when there's a water of concern or a contaminant of concern, they do it more frequently. Once they've identified an issue with the water, they identify the source of the issue. At that point, if the water is impaired, they're required to do a TMDL. There is a TMDL for a chloride impaired water in the state. It assesses the load allocation that is going to be somehow allocated. Private property is by far the highest load. Talking to the agency about how they're going to implement that, they haven't really determined that as of yet. They are hoping that this program will be a step in implementation, a voluntary step, but ultimately they do have ability to impose what are called the implementation plan requirements. And I can't speak for the agency about what they would do, but I think mandates would be on the table under a TMDL.
Given what looks to be the urgency of this, why are we waiting every 3 years to test?
That's a requirement of the Federal Clean Water Act.
Not sure we're waiting to test. They're testing regularly.
They test ongoing, and the 3 years is that they report their testing every 3 years.
Yeah.
The testing is something that,
Reporting is only every 3 years. Testing is going on more
Yeah.
often.
Representative North.
Yeah, so the current language is targeting commercial applicators only. Now, the state applicators are already covered, are already doing something. What about the municipal?
we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, that's later to go.
Let's try and get through the rest of the bill and then we'll have more discussion.
So page 7, 1354, you have the education and outreach for commercial salt applicators about the program. And then you have on page 8, the outreach and education for the public who purchase salt or salt alternatives for private use, about the potential harm to water quality, pets, which was something that Representative Austin had requested, and wildlife from excessive application of salt and salt alternatives and how to decrease the potential harm. Section 2 is that A&R report on salt sheds and covering of salt storage facilities. They are going to report to you January 15th, 2026. It's going to include an inventory of the facilities used for storage. It's going to estimate the number of facilities that are currently covered, an estimate of the number of facilities that are not covered and are within 100 yards of surface water or drinking water source, an estimate of those that are not covered and are more than 100 yards from a surface water or drinking water source, an estimate of the total cost to cover or move the facilities for the storage of salt and sand mixtures or sand that is not mixed with salt, including a proposed annual amount of funding that would be required to meet the timelines for cover or management. So no mandate to cover, just a report to inform you of what would need to be done or stages of what would need to be done. And then on page 9, section 3, this is the municipal salt applicator section. So it's its own section now, on or before July 1, 2026. A&R in collaboration with AOT identify and make changes to the Vermont local roads curriculum needed to support municipal salt applicators and meeting the purpose of the act, including training for best management practices for spreading salt on roads, parking lots, and sidewalks. There's the definition of the municipal salt applicator. It's those who are applying or supervising others in the applicator's capacity as an employee or agent of a town or a municipality, does not include state employees. Then notwithstanding the ability to seek a remedy against a municipal employee under 24 VSA 901A, beginning July 1, 2027, a municipal employee shall not be subject to any civil liability for acts or omission the employee conducts as a municipal salt applicator if they completed the Vermont local roads curriculum, providing the BMPs for applying salt in the previous 365 days, the alleged damages are caused solely by hazard from snow or ice. Any failure or delay in removing or mitigating the hazards as the result of the municipal salt applicator's implementation of the BMPs learned under the Vermont local roads curriculum. Protection from liability does not apply when damages are due to gross negligence or reckless disregard of the hazard. So moving on, section 4 is in an implementation section. Honestly, you don't even need subsection A anymore because you've already built into the provisions that it has to be done by rulemaking. And I forgot to change the date on page 10, line 13. November 1 should be July 1. But honestly, you don't need sub A anymore anyway. And then sub B, A&R shall solicit interest from third-party vendors for training and certifying commercial salt applicators. There's insufficient interest. They can recommend a fee to charge for certification of commercial applicators and recommend that fee to you, the General Assembly, because you are the ones who have fee-making authority. Section 5, this is the authorized position and appropriation. There's one new position authorized in FY26. Page 11, lines 8 through 11, there'd be $150,000 appropriated on top of A&R's budget for that position. Then on line 12, you state that it's the intention of the General Assembly to make that appropriation annually. You can't bind future General Assemblies, but you can express your intent as you do here. And then in addition to the other funds appropriated to A&R in 26, 250,000 is appropriated from the general fund for purpose of contracting with an external organization to establish the certification training. It will be funded on an ongoing basis, certification fees. And then the whole act takes effect on passage.
Questions on this? Further question? Not seeing any. All right, so I think the Judiciary Committee is going to be looking at this tomorrow afternoon. Is that right, Michael?
Yep.
Just giving us another flyby and letting us know. I think important information to remember is that the Agency of Natural Resources strongly supports creating this program to help hopefully avoid fluoride, the possibility of more fluoride TMDLs. But they also feel that the liability provisions are essential to making it happen. I mean, they're looking at this as an efficient tool for them to use to address a contaminant of concern in the best way possible, to avoid an expensive TMDL or the TMDLs spreading, which are more expensive to implement. That's the framing of where we're at, and we should hear back from our Judiciary Committee, and then I do hope to move this bill as soon as possible. Representative Norton.
I did confirm with Charles Martin that that is the case what you just described. Is interested in both those.
Great, thank you. Representative Logan.
So practical question, how does this bill move forward? Since there's a similar bill moving in the Senate, what's the legislative process?
There is, I mean, what my intention is to get it through the House, approved through the House, so that it's good work done by the House. And if the Senate can, and so chooses to take our language that we have approved and add it to a bill, that miscellaneous A&R bill that is over there, they could choose to do that with our language.
It is on Senate Judiciary's agenda, S29 this week. Whether they get to it or not, I don't know.
Further questions? Thank you, Michael. We will take a 7-minute break and then start again back at